Hi, welcome to Chad's Silversmithing. First, before we get started, if you wouldn't mind hitting the like button or leaving a comment, that kind of thing really helps the channel out a lot. I'd appreciate it. Today I'd like to do a little pendant. I feel like it's got some really nice cool curves and I think it'll be fun to make, and I hope you enjoy it. Before we get started on this, though, I wanted to thank my YouTube subscribers. We're about to pass 7,000. I think that's amazing and wonderful. And you guys really rock. I appreciate all of your support. I also wanted to welcome a new patron over on Patreon. Thank you, Kim, for signing up. I really appreciate it. I hope you get as much out of Patreon as I'm getting out of Patreon, because I've met so many nice people over there, and I wanted to thank them as well, too, for all of their support. Thank you so much. All right, let's get started on this guy. So let's take a look at what I drew up here in my design idea book. Just about filled this one up. This is, ever since I started doing my channel, I started drawing up all my designs. So I find that it's nice, it helps me to get a more a plan in my mind in order to come up with a better final product, and especially because it's got a kind of a grid on here like graph paper. So I'm not terribly good at drawing, so it helps me to keep things sort of symmetrical and lined up right. So if you're interested in that, there's several versions of this on the merch store. But let me get the stones here. I got this kind of rose quartz. It's going to go right there. And then I got a little pear-shaped amethyst. It'll go right here. And I think that'll make for a pretty pendant. I'm going to make this stuff out of 10 gauge square, or excuse me, not 10 gauge square, 12 gauge square is what that's going to be. And I'll probably use a 26 gauge 3/16 inch fine silver bezel strip for the bezels. And I generally make a step for the faceted stone if there is one, using some 18 gauge round wire to create a couple of layers of that in order for the stone to sit on top of. This one I'm also going to do an open back bezel so you get the light through it, and I'll probably put some square wire as the platform on that one, so I don't need to raise this one up as high as this. So to start with, let's make some bezels. Let's do the rose quartz first. I use 3/16 inch for a lot of stuff. It's a good size. It's tall enough for most stones. And if you want it to be shorter, you can always file it a little shorter. Sometimes if I'm doing really small stuff, I'll just cut it in half, height-wise. That seems to work just fine. Make a little scratch on it here. I always leave just a skosh extra in order to have some room to file off. If you haven't watched my videos before, I use hard silver sheet solder and a spray-on flux called My-T-Flux. If you're doing a bezel, it always is a good idea to push the ends past each other once or twice in order to get the metal springy. So it's pushing together like that. That way you'll have less chance of it starting to sag and pull apart when you solder it. Where did I put my tweezers? Buried in a pile of stuff over there. These aren't even my good ones. can reshape this in whatever manner you like. I just kind of manually do it anymore. You could put it around a mandrel or something. Did okay on the size there. I think I have some skinny square wire that I made the other day from some 14. It's actually pulled it down to about 16. This is maybe a little bit bigger than 16, but I think this will work great for a platform for this to sit on. So let's let me file the end flat first. Square wire has a tendency to try and twist on you a little bit when you bend it. It's because this side here is trying to stretch and this side here is trying to compress. And so it tries to find an easier way to bend because it doesn't really like doing that. Sometimes if you face it from different directions when you're bending it, kind of go back and forth like that, switch it up. I have a tendency to keep it a little bit more in the same plane. You don't want to end up with a Mobius strip. Now we're starting to get pretty close. Generally, when I'm doing stuff like this, I cut it just a little bit too long. And then I'll gradually snip out pieces until it fits in there perfectly. So let's cut it a little bit long here. I'll try and get rid of any wobbles that we have on the ring kind of being wavy like that. Still a little bit too big. Won't quite fit in there, which is fine. That's what I was shooting for. Let's snip out a little bit here. Getting pretty close, just a skosh more. I'm not even sure where I picked up the term skosh. I wonder what the etymology of that is. So that's in there nice and snug. If I get it too small, then it'll leave a little gap there, and I don't like to have a gap on the bottom. So we'll go ahead and solder this in then, and we can do any final shaping if we need to. It's not perfectly round, but our stone may not be perfectly round either. So hopefully it's close enough to fool the eye. All right, so a couple things before you do this. Give it one more look over to make sure that we don't have a twist too badly. So before we solder in, I always take a moment and push it down, make sure it's flat on the bottom. You don't want to have a wonky surface for your stone to sit on. And cut a few more pieces of solder, and we'll solder that on. For your fluxing stuff, you want to get it nice and crusty. That's all flux. I'm going to make a little ring of pieces of solder. We're going to set this right on top of that ring that I'm going to create, and have the solder just kind of get wicked up once the metal reaches the right temperature. It's kind of a slick trick. You want to try and be touching the bezel and the wire if possible. That way, when it flows, it'll flow up in that crack between them. You want to heat it from the outside like this. If any of them don't flow, it could be that they're not in contact, and if you do just a little tapping down above the piece of solder like that, sometimes it'll get it in contact so it actually melts onto the piece. Okay, then I usually just take my baster file. Got a nice clean looking bottom then. It's sitting up pretty high right now because we have a lot of bezel, so we'll be cutting that or filing that down quite a bit before we set this, and then we'll seat it in there more securely. It's a pretty snug fit on this one, so I'm going to spend a minute filing this down shorter since I'm going to have to do it later anyway. Give you a little better idea what it's going to look like. Okay. Set him to the side for a minute. Let's do this little pear shape. Okay, I'm going to use the same type of bezel. I'm going to make the platform for it a little bit differently on this one. When you're gauging the size for something with sharp points like this, you never want to end the bezel on the point there because it's impossible to get it sized correctly, or if you solder it there, it's going to be near impossible to actually set the stone. So definitely don't want to do that. I usually try and position the solder joint somewhere on the side, you know. So make a sharp bend about right here. On these ones, I'm not leaving a heck of a lot of space extra for filing purposes because I want it to be pretty snug on this one. I don't have a lot of excess space. That's looking pretty good. The size pretty close. I'm try and get the shape as close as I can as well. Okay, I have a little piece of 18 gauge wire. Let's file the end flat. Just 18 gauge round wire. For this one, since I'm trying to get a sharp point, I am going to end these at the point, because if you try to bend wire as sharply as that point is, you're going to have some problems getting it that sharp. So we're going to go ahead and I usually just kind of do this into a teardrop shape. You can do it on a bail making pliers or whatever. Want it to fit in there snugly. That's pretty close, actually. That looks pretty good, actually. So I'm going to do a second one of those as well. So we'll just do one more of those, and then we'll solder them in. Alright, so there's a second one. The second one I think fits a little better, so I'm going to put that one on the bottom. I have that other one sitting right on top. And I want to push it down to make sure, just like on the other one, everything's sitting flat. And then we'll solder it in the same way. One more. Throw an extra one on there just to be safe. Same way, we're going to heat this from the outside. Okay, just file that bottom flat just like on the other one. Chances are good I'll have to file this one down a little bit too. If I decide I need to put a third ring in there, I may when we get ready to towards the end if it seems like it's necessary, or I could just file it down a little further. I think once I file it a little bit, I'll be able to get it in there straighter. So really now all we have to do is make these pieces here, and like I said, I'm going to use some 12 gauge wire. I think, let's see how long of pieces I need. I have some little 20 gauge wire here we can use as a measuring guide. That's pretty close. Mark right there. We'll see if this piece is long enough. It is not. Okay, we'll use a piece off of here. Let's do it this way. Let's get it straight. Ninety-five millimeters. The center is about right there. Let's use that as a guide point for starting. I'm using the handle on my ring measure. Just like before, it's trying to do that little twisty thing on me, if you see it like that. So we want to see if we can correct that. So that's got to go out a little flatter at the top here. Squeeze. I think what I'm going to do is make a mark that, and then if you want a real precise line, sometimes you can use a pin or something to scratch through your little marker mark, arky mark, and the funky bunch. I'm going to cut it a little bit that way and then file it smooth. You know, size-wise I think we're good. Mostly I want to make sure I get a decent angle here. I feel like these have to curve outwards just a little bit like that. I think once I solder that together it'll be easier to make that more symmetrical, and then we can I think, like I said, I'm going to flatten the bottom here just a little bit so it kind of widens out a tiny bit. Just for fun. You'll notice in my videos I do a lot of pick soldering. I find it to be one of the most useful skills that I've had to learn as a silversmith. If you're interested, I'll put a video link right up there. You can see my video about pick soldering. So otherwise you just pick up a piece like this, you heat the piece up to soldering temperature, and then you stick a little bit of solder in there and focus right there, so you can't get it to stick there. Okay, see, when I look at it this way, this side's much bigger than that, so I need to move that in that direction. That's actually pretty good. I've done much worse on my first go-arounds before when I'm doing stuff like this. I think that looks pretty good. So that'll probably work there. So next we're going to need to, it's going to go right there. Let me go flatten this out a little bit with the I think once I'm going to use the Dremel to clean up the inside of that, so we don't, because I created a bunch of tool marks when I was bending this. So I'm going to just grind that smooth in there, and then I think that one will be done. So I'll be right back. Alright, so I think I got everything kind of cleaned up a little bit. That's looking alright so far. I cut a piece the right length for this. I actually cut it a little bit longer, and I found the center. And I think I want this this loop up here to be huge, but it needs to be big enough to allow for a decent sized chain. So I'm going to use my bail making pliers here, one pair of them. I think I'm going to have to grab it right about here. See if I can't bend it back in the other direction. Like that, kind of. Same way on this one. I kind of get a sort of a cotter pin looking thing. That's not bad for a first try. It looks this way. It's actually quite nice. Got to get them to both lay down kind of good. I kind of like that. I'll have to twist this a little more after it's soldered together, but I think I just need to file these a little bit. So let's start with this bezel. I think I'm going to start at the bottom here, and then we'll do the top one as well. I think I'm going to quick solder that before anything moves around too much. I think that's pretty close. Oops. I dropped the ball. Flux that. Let's flux it over again. Okay, so I have it all soldered together and everything. I did a little Dremel cleanup on it so it doesn't have as many big file marks and stuff. So I'm going to heat that up and let it sit in the pickle for a while. And I will polish it and we'll set those stones. I'll be back in a few. So I got it pretty much cleaned up and polished, and I thought we'd go ahead and set these stones. Straighten that up a little bit in order to get him in there easily. I find it's difficult with if you're doing round stones like this. If they're perfectly round, no matter how tight you get the bezel, at some point or another it's going to loosen up enough to where it'll start rotating. So if you want it to stay in place, you could put a little dab of epoxy on the inside of the bezel somewhere just to hold it in place. But I don't care too much on this one. Okay, I do this a little differently than a lot of people. I use my chain nose pliers, and I'm going to use the flat edge here to start with. Just put that tight up against there. If you use a bezel pusher and a burnisher and stuff, that's fine too. I'm going to start kind of curving it over a little bit. The stone has a little irregularity, so it's not going to look completely round, unfortunately. I didn't notice that until just now. However, I was looking for something that would match an amethyst nicely. And I am surprisingly low on round stones for some reason. Okay. I've already filed this down to about the correct height for this particular stone. So, and I'm going to do pretty much the same thing I just did with this one, except I'm going to stop periodically and make sure it's sitting in there flat. I have a tendency to rock on you just a little bit sometimes. One thing I did do also, when you have a sharp point like this on a bezel, you're trying to compress too much metal into that space there, and so you have a tendency to get wrinkles. And one way you can do it, well, first of all, get it filed down to the appropriate height. And then if you actually thin out to the bezel just at the tip there, just a tiny bit, it removes some of the metal there, so when you're compressing it over the tip, it's not trying to compress so much metal there. There's a little bit less, so it's a little easier to do that then. Here's a comparison. Pretty close. I went the opposite direction. I didn't even think about that. But I think that turned out pretty good. I'm going to do a little bit of final polishing with the rotary tool over there to clean up the tops of the bezels and maybe in between there if I can. I'll take some good pictures and put them at the end. Okay, well that was the Rose Quartz and Amethyst slide pendant. I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, make sure to hit the like button before you leave. That really helps out a lot. I'd also love it if you'd leave a comment. I appreciate suggestions for videos, constructive criticism, and just like to hear what you have to say, so feel free to do that. Don't forget to check out the video description down below for some various things. You know you've been wanting one of these pickle time tumblers here. I finally got my example here so I could show you, but it's cute and I won't spill on myself so much. So, in addition to that though, you should be able to find a link to my website or my Patreon page, as well as a Buy Me a Coffee link if you care to just give me a little financial support. So, thanks for watching. I really appreciate your time. Take care. Happy silversmithing.